Hello everyone. Today I'm going to discuss a very interesting topic with you how to file US income tax return as an international taxpayer. We know some of the international taxpayers, they are students, some of them they're visiting scholars, some of them they're teachers, some of them are trainees, some of them are researchers, and some others they're all pair students. And they all have one question in their mind in any tax year is that do they need to file a 1040 or they have to file 1040 NR instead? Or can they file 1040 NR in some of the tax years or 1040 in some other tax years? So now I'm going to guide you through this interesting topic. So as you can see right here, this um, interesting picture was actually taken at Camden inside of Rutgers University. And that one is actually a very good installation with a carve out of the human brain with all those ideas and everything around that art piece. So I took a picture and literally facing outside of that straight into the streets and avenues. So as you can see right here, I use it as an example to say, okay, so for some of the taxpayers, filing tax returns is just easy as a pie, but for some others, it could be as difficult as an enigma because, especially if a person is from another country, they may not necessarily comprehend what's going on with the U.S. tax system and how to actually file the U.S. income tax return. And based upon my experience, some of the taxpayers when they're from other countries like Germany, and usually they complain saying, compared to their very simplified tax system, the U.S. tax system is a little bit too complicated. Okay, but whether the taxation system is easy or difficult, that's not my main concern. So now here are actually two concepts of the international taxpayers. One group is called resident alien. So the one common type of the resident alien is literally a no-brainer, which is could be the same as green card holder, aka lawful permanent resident or LPR. So besides the resident alien, some of the visa holders which are either students or just simply visiting scholars. And usually F1 or F2 visa holder, they're subject to a 5-year period as an exempt individual. But once they go past the 5 years, then they are no longer considered non-resident alien, but they have to count the days. And once they reach 183 days or more, then they can be considered resident alien for U.S. tax purposes. Likewise, J1 and J2 visa holders, they're used to be subject to a 2-year period as an exempt individual, but in terms of when they go past the 2-year period, then they no longer are considered non-resident aliens either. They have to count the days for the substantial presence purposes, and they may be able to file the U.S. income tax return as a resident aliens. And another group happens to be saying non-resident alien or NRA marries a U.S. citizen or resident alien spouse, and and that spouse is willing to treat a non-resident alien as a tax resident, and they file a joint return. So in this situation, the non-resident alien could become a tax resident anyway. And and of course, in real life, you have those asylees, the parolees, the refugees, those undocumented immigrants, and even other other people who don't hold FJMQ visa type. That used to be actually the traditional way to say non-resident aliens, or simply just awaiting the green card. But any one of them, they fulfill the substantial presence test, which is 183 days or more in the span of the 3 years encompassing the current year and the two immediate previous years. And of course, there's another one, which may start the calendar year as a non-resident alien, but at the end of the year, it's no longer a non-resident alien. But due to the current situation, they did not fulfill the green card test or the substantial presence test for the tax year, but they may actually fulfill the substantial presence test during the next calendar year. So they may make the first year choice for that tax year despite not meeting the green card test or SPT for the tax year. And as a resident alien, they have to report on worldwide income just like any US citizen or green card holder, including all those income earned inside US and outside US, literally throughout the whole world. But for any of the resident aliens, they do not need to submit Form 8843, and they can file 1040 form instead of 1040 NR. The taxpayers who make the first year choice, they cannot revoke it without the IRS approval. Also, the non-resident aliens who are treated as tax resident by their US citizen or resident alien spouse may actually file jointly or separately afterward and have to report worldwide income until the choice is ended or suspended, like divorce, either spouse's death, either spouse's revocation, legal separation, or just simply due to inadequate records. But there are also two other situations, also applicable to some of the resident aliens, like they can file 1040 just like any US citizens. They can claim dependents and may be able to claim some tax credits, like saying earned income tax credit, education credit, net premium tax credit, student loan interest deduction, and even say for the 2025 tax year and beyond. Well, thanks to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, those can also claim overtime deduction and tips deduction. But one filing status cannot claim any of those tax credits or the deduction happens to be if married filing separately or MFS. And of course, the US citizens and resident aliens, they have to file US income tax return wherever you live in the world. So some people ask saying, okay, I hate US, so I would like to just tear up my green card and this and that, or simply just giving out US password, not informing anybody. Does it work? No, I no longer need to file US income tax return? Hell no. Number one, you can tear up your green card, but only a US judge can revoke or rescind your green card, unless you voluntarily sign an I-407 form to just give it a green card, and it has to be approved by the judge itself. Or if you want to just give it a US passport, then you have to go to the US embassy or consulate in a foreign country and need to go through the process to really formally renounce one's US citizenship. Therefore, it is not just your decision. And there are two special situations regarding the resident aliens. One is if resident alien would not treat the non-resident alien spouse as a resident because, say, non-resident alien spouse won't file jointly with the resident alien spouse, or simply because the non-resident spouse doesn't have any SSN or ITIN, but in that situation, if the resident alien pays for more than half of the cost of maintaining that household and even have certain dependents like children or relatives other than the non-resident spouse, and the children and or relatives, they have SSN or ITIN, then the resident alien can really file head of household and claim those dependents and relatives as their dependents. So that's another way to literally bypass the SSN ITIN issue for the non-resident alien spouse. But another situation would be the resident alien is willing to file jointly with the non-resident spouse, but the non-resident spouse doesn't have any SSN or ITIN. Then what to do right now? Well, some of the non-resident spouses, they may be eligible for the social security number. Then in that case, the resident alien spouse has to help file the form SS5 and apply for the spouse's SSN at a Social Security office or just simple U.S. consulate. But if the spouse is not eligible for Social Security number, then the best option would be to include a W-7 form in the tax return. The W-7 form is an application form for the individual taxpayer identification number, or I-10, and the whole tax return cannot be e-filed. And usually, if someone is to mail the tax return with a W-7 form to just IRS at Austin, Texas, the turnaround will be at least 70 days, aka 10 weeks, which is simply too long, and sometimes they may not necessarily process it. So it is better to set up an appointment with the local IRS office and then bring the tax return, including that W-7 form, to that office so that not only the IRS office can process the tax return, but also the W-7 form can be processed by the certifying acceptance agent or CAA there to just speed up the process and prevent any further delay. Okay, so I just concluded the portion of resident alien, but then conversely there's another group called non-resident alien, or NRA. So the definition of non-resident alien is the individual does not meet the green card test or the substantial presence test. So among those people, some of them they're F1, F2 visa holders. They're still within the 5-year period and is exempt individual. Some of them they're J1 or J2 visa holder. They're still within the 2-year period and exempt individual. So the F1 and F1 visa holder, usually they're students, but F2 they're literally dependents of F1 visas and they can't seek any employment at all in US. J1 encompasses student, teacher, trainee, or even au pair. J2, they're dependents of J1 visa holder, but they are allowed to work in US. Non-resident alien, if marries a US citizen or resident alien spouse, but does not file jointly and is not treated as a tax resident, but still within either the 2-year period as an J1 or J2, or 5-year period as an F1 and F2 and exempt individual, then it is still considered non-resident alien. Or the taxpayer, for some reason, doesn't meet green card test or substantial presence test for the tax year, but also cannot meet or make the first year choice for that tax year, then the person will still be considered non-resident alien. And so for any non-resident alien who files a U.S. income tax return, will only have to report the U.S. source income, but simply not other sources in, saying, your country of origin or in another part of the world. Plus, married non-resident aliens cannot file joint return and can only file separately. So the filing size will be MFS, especially if either spouse is non-resident aliens throughout the tax year. And also, non-resident aliens, generally, they can claim tax-treated benefits for certain sources of income, like wages or scholarship during the applicable time period. Generally, that is within, saying, the exempt individual period, like 2 years or 5 years, but some of them may only be applicable to only 4 years. And then some tax treaties, they have provisions that enable you to claim the tax treaty benefits even you are already tax residents for US purposes, like those people from China. As long as they maintain their student status, they can still claim the tax treaty benefits per Article 20C to exclude $5,000 wages from the U.S. income tax return, or unlimited scholarship income per Article 20B. And a lot of those non-resident aliens, they can only claim the itemized deduction for their 1040 NRs, but Indian students and businesses, apprentices alone, they're the exception, because they can claim the standard deduction per U.S. India Tax Treaty, Article 21.2. So whatever standard deduction any U.S. citizen or resident alien can claim, so say for tax year 2024, a single U.S. citizen or resident alien can claim $14,600 as standard deduction. That is also the same amount for a single Indian student as well. And usually, the non-resident aliens cannot claim any dependents under 1040 NR. But if the individual taxpayer is from Canada, Mexico, India, and South Korea, then they can claim the dependents following the rules on U.S. citizens and resident aliens. Also, non-resident aliens cannot claim any tax credits at all, like earned income credit, education credit, net premium tax credit, but they may be able to claim the student loan interest deduction as long as they're not MFS, plus HSA deduction or a traditional IRA deduction, as long as the income is a U.S. source. So now, after elaborating on the differences between the resident aliens and non-resident aliens, here comes the two important tests when coming to say the residency. One is called the green card test, the other one is the substantial presence test, or SPT. So the green card test is just like the word goes. Well, as long as you have a green card, aka lawful permanent resident, then you are literally a resident alien at any time during the calendar year. So then, for the U.S. tax purposes, it's not just that, but also in reality under U.S. immigration law as well. So the other one is called substantial presence test. So just like the word indicates, you need to be physically present in U.S. And then for the current year, so say right now in 2025, you have to be physically present in U.S. for at least 31 days during 2025. And now you need to accumulate at least 183 days during a 3-year period encompassing the current year 2025 and the two immediate prior years, which is 2024 and 2023. And you have to count all the days you are present right now in 2025 and 1/3 of the days you were present in 2024 and 1/6 of the days you were present in 2023. If the total is at least 183 days or more, then you can file 2025 as a resident alien for U.S. tax purposes, aka tax resident. But if somehow you do not satisfy that, well, we can further discuss that issue later. So regarding the days of presence in the U.S., well, the general rule is that any day you're physically present in the U.S. is 1 day. Also, if you're in U.S. at any time during the day, say the arrival date, the departure date, even you're only on U.S. soil for just 1 minute, 1 hour, a minute or an hour is a day. So just because you didn't stay in U.S. for the full 24 hours doesn't exclude that day because you're already on U.S. soil for at least a minute, a second, or even an hour. So regarding the residency starting date, for the resident aliens, well, if a person already meet both the green card test and the substantial presence test in the same calendar year, then the residency starting date is the earlier of either one already passes the substantial presence test. Usually that is July the 2nd in a non-leap year. So sometimes people joke about July 2nd as literally the halfway day. But if in a leap year, then it is July the 1st because July the 1st is the 183rd day of the leap year. Or the first day you are present in U.S. as a green card holder. So let me give you a very good example. So let's say right now it's 2025. A person is waiting for the green card to arrive. And at the same time, this person already fulfilled the substantial presence test on July the 2nd, 2025, because this person never left US at all ever since the last year. So in this situation, the person easily fulfills the SPT and becomes a resident alien. But then the person was granted the green card exactly the next day, July the 3rd. So in that situation, which one is the earliest? Of course, it's July the 2nd. You wouldn't say July the 3rd is the first day of the residency date, and you try to go all the way back about the residency date. Then actually January the 1st is simply not July the 3rd. Okay, so here's another situation. If the individual taxpayer was a U.S. resident already during the previous calendar year and are a U.S. resident for any part of the current year, then simply it is a U.S. resident at the beginning of the current year. Usually it's January the 1st. Or that can happen as well in this situation. If one receives his green card abroad, so let's say this person is a very lucky green card lottery winner, then the residency starting date will be the first day that taxpayer physically present the U.S. as a green card holder. Okay, so for some of the taxpayers, they don't meet the green card test or SPT for the current year or the immediate prior year, and did not choose to be treated as a U.S. resident for part of the prior year, but meet the SPT in the following year, then the person can still file as a resident alien for U.S. tax purposes, but with one condition. They have to attach a statement to the income tax return choosing to be treated as a resident for part of the current year. So it happens a lot. Let's say a person is on an H-1B visa and the person never came to US before. One of the cases that I encounter is this. The scholar herself came to US in 2023, but that was September, and the person never set foot in US before. So apparently for 2022, she will not be treated as a US resident at all for 2022. But for 2023, because she arrived in September of 2023, then apparently didn't fulfill the substantial presence test for the tax year. Plus, H-1B visa is not green card whatsoever. It's just a dual purpose visa. So apparently, she can't exclude days either, and you have to count the days. But because the scholar is required to stay in US for the next 2 years, so apparently the scholar wouldn't go anywhere and easily fulfill the substantial percentage for both 2023 and 2024 in the same calendar year. So then when I help this female scholar file the US income tax return, I add a statement to her 2023 US income tax return and listen the reasons why. And of course I have to indicate that she was present in US at least 31 days in a row in 2023, aka the current year. And then of course she has to be present in the US for at least 75% of the number of days, beginning with the first day of the 31-day period and ending with the last day of the current year. And of course for that 75% requirement purposes, one can treat up to like 5 days of absence from the US as days of presence in US for the purposes of 75% requirement. So the attached statement on the 1040, they must have such elements. Number one is the name and address. Number two is you're making the first year choice for the current year. Number three is you're not a U.S. resident in the prior year. 4, you qualified as a U.S. resident under substantial presence as in the following year. And then 5, the number of days you were present in the U.S. during the current year. 6, the date or dates of that 31-day period of presence and the period of continuous presence in the U.S. during the current year. 7 is the date or days of absence from the U.S. during the current year, if any, that you're treating as days of presence under the first year choice. And of course, you better not file the 1040 or the statement for the current year until you meet a substantial percentage in the following year. So if you haven't fulfilled that test as of April 15, which is the usual filing due date of current year return, then you can actually file Form 4868 for an extension for filing the 1040. So then you can wait until a reasonable period after you met that test for the following year. And of course, the exceptions to such substantial presence test is number one, there are people who live near the border between US and Canada or US and Mexico, and they commute to work in US every day. In that case, don't count. Don't count any days. Number two is that the person only stay in US for less than 24 hours and literally in transit between two places outside US. So it could be very simple, saying you're on a flight from Pacific Ocean and you stop in Los Angeles to just wait for another flight. And then after that, you board another flight and then straight to Europe. So in that case, it doesn't count. Or if the person happens to be a crew member of a foreign vessel and stay in US, nope, don't count any of those days. Or the person can leave US not because of intentional, but because of a medical condition while in US and the person has to be treated. Then in that case, don't count any of the days, and the person, if the individual can actually file Form 8843 to exclude the days during US due to a medical condition reason. And of course, if you can exclude a number of days for the SPT purposes because you're an exempt individual, then literally all the days in that specific year could be 0. So what is the definition of an exempt individual? Well, these groups, they're exempt individuals. Number one is any student on FJMQ visa. They temporarily stay in US and substantially complies with the non-immigrant visa requirement. The second group is JOQ visa holder as a teacher or trainee, temporary in US and substantially complies with the non-immigration visa requirement. And of course, there are others. Professional athletes, temporary in US, competing in a charitable sports event, or there is a foreign government related individual as an A or G visa holder. A is a foreign government related individual like a diplomat. G usually is related to NATO or non-profit organization. But the person cannot be an A3 or G5 visa holder because A3 and G5 visa holders, they're domestic employees, servants, and personal attendants of those A1, A2, G1, G2, G3, G4 visa holders. So in that case, the A3 and G5 is not an exempt individual. They have to actually count the days just like anybody else. They cannot do the 8843 form. And of course, any F1 or F2 visa holder usually is subject to a total of 5 calendar years and an exempt individual and considered a non-resident alien during the time period, or J1 or J2 visa holder under a total of 2 calendar years as an exempt individual and considered a non-resident alien during the time period. So any of those exempt individual, they have to file Form 8843 during the exempt individual time period to substantially comply with the non-immigrant visa requirement. And for those who has US source income while being an exempt individual, then the person has a filing requirement, which means they have to file 1040 NR. Then they have to attach Form 8843 to it. And either you e-file the 1040 NR along with 8843, especially if a single non-resident alien, or you have to mail the 1040 NR with Form 8843 attached as cover, especially if the person is a married non-resident alien, or just simply instructed by a tax software like Sprint Tax, then you cannot e-file it because no IRS would allow an e-file return with a incomplete, no spouse as an item to be accepted. And you have to mail the 1040 NR along with the 8843 to the IRS office at either Austin, Texas, if you don't owe federal at all or you get federal refund, or you have to mail it to Charlotte in North Carolina if you do owe. But some of them, they don't have any U.S. source income during the tax year. Then you don't need to file 1040 but you have to file Form 8843 nonetheless. And you have to submit it by the due date, including extensions, for filing Form 1040 Nowadays, it is streamlined as saying due date, of course, is April 15 usually, and file an extension, which means Form 4868, then you can have until October 15th to do it. And you have to mail that 8843 form in certified mail, which requires IRS signature upon the receipt, to the Department of Treasury Internal Revenue Service Center, Austin, Texas 73301-0215. So what is the Form 8843? The 8843 is actually a form for those exempt individuals and those due to medical conditions. Not only they have to file in order to exclude the days during U.S. for the SPT purposes, but also either comply with the non-immigrant visa requirement, or they can provide a reason why they're in U.S. but not intentionally. Then what are the consequences if you don't file Form 8843? Though it doesn't carry a penalty in terms of money or fine or this and that, but then the FJMQ visa holder will be regarded as a resident alien for U.S. tax purposes, and it will be saying you're not substantially complying with the visa requirements, because FJMQ is non-immigrant, which means it does not enable you to immigrate to U.S. Or if you're a foreign government related individual, as long as you are not an A3 or G5, but in other A1, A2, G1, G2, G3, G4 visa holder, you don't need to file 8843. Or if the individual changes the visa type from FJMQ to just simply a non-FJMQ one like H1B, or just simply B1, B2 visa, then you don't need to file 8843. And if a non-resident alien marries a U.S. citizen or resident alien, files a joint return, and is treated as resident alien for U.S. tax purposes, then the former non-resident alien spouse doesn't need to file 8843 form. And of course, for the 8843, all the taxpayers, they have to indicate the specific beginning and ending dates of that tax year. And of course, if the taxpayer receives a taxpayer identification number, or TIN, which could be a social security number, SSN, or an individual taxpayer identification number, ITIN, then you can also fill in the TIN number. Otherwise, you just simply leave it blank. For those who are teachers and trainees, they have to fill out Part 1, the general information, and Part 2, teachers and trainees. Whereas students, they have to fill out Part 1, general information, Part 3, students. And of course, you have to fill out the first date you enter US in the visa type, regardless of whether there are any changes afterward to the status and visa type. So say if your very first date of entry into the US is January the 1st, 2024, then you have to indicate exactly January the 1st, 2024. Just don't give me a more recent one saying January 1st, 2025. That is not your first date of entry in US. And of course, if you came to US as an F1, but right now is J1, then you have to indicate likewise and say, what is the current visa type? When did you make that change? And what is the previous visa type? And of course, when calculating the number of days, the arrival date is counted as a day, and so is the departure date. And the exact dates, you can find it on the I-94. So don't give me an excuse and say you don't know how many days you stay in US. Just show me the I-90 form and I will believe. And of course, regardless of whether you're a teacher trainee or as a student, you have to um, list the name, address, and telephone number of that academic institution. And that can be found on your SEBIS or CVIS paper. And of course, including the name, the address, and telephone number of that academic director, international advisor, or designated person. And every year it's different, so be careful on who the designated person is. Sometimes it could be the same person throughout the year, sometimes it does not. And of course, besides Form 8843, if a J visa holder, one has to apply actually the 6-year look back route to see whether one already was an exempt individual for at least 2 years. If F visa holder, then one has to see whether one was exempt individual for at least 5 years. So when coming to the same counted the those days and even toward the 2 or 5 year exempt individual period, we have to also take into account those days you were an exempt individual under another visa. So say J or J2 or F2. And I can give you an example. Say there was a client who used to come to US more than a decade ago with his parent. The taxpayer himself was an F2 visa holder and stayed in US from 2013 to 18. So now we know for the tax purposes, the person who is an F2 visa holder is only subject to a 5-year period as exempt individual. So in his case, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, already 5 calendar years. Then 18, he's no longer an exempt individual. And then years later, he came back, this time as an F1 visa. So despite now, he's still an F1 visa holder, but when coming to his filing status and the tax residency, we found out that he already maxed out the whole 5 years and as an F visa holder between 13 and 17 as an F2. So now he came back as an F1, but for tax purposes, he will be not a non-resident alien, but he can count the days and may file as a resident alien. Or if the person used to be a J1 visa holder and literally stay in US for 3 calendar years during the first stint, and then years later, this person came back as an F1 visa holder. Then when coming to the F1 visa holder, because usually that was subject to a 5-year period and exempt individual, but the individual previously came to US as a J1 visa holder and totally maxed out the 2-year period as an exempt individual. So now this time when coming back on F1, then the total years he would be still considered as an exempt individual will be 5 minus 2 equals 3. So 3 years at most instead of 5. And of course, if due to this calculation we found out that one has to count the days for substantial presence and cannot exclude the number of days anymore, then the person may be able to file 1040 instead of 1040 NR as resident alien and need not submit Form 8843 anymore. So for 8843, if you have to file 1040 NR and then you only need to fill out the beginning and ending dates of the tax year, the 10 if any, Part 1 and 2 or Part 1 and 3. But you do not fill in the residency addresses or sign the Form 8843 because you're filing the form along with your U.S. income tax return and not by the form itself. So don't make the mistake. You fill in from A to Z and disregarding what are the bold words to the left of the residency addresses. Only fill in the residency addresses if you file the form by itself and not along with a tax return. Open your eyes and read it. Don't be blind. And conversely, if you do not need to file 1040 NR, then of course you have to also fill out the residency addresses and sign the form, because now you're really filing the form by itself and not with your U.S. income tax return. And on this slide, I also give you the websites to check the most current year for the 8843, but also the prior year address. And that address is simply like a cookie cutter format, but you only need to change the two red highlighted numbers as seen right here. If it says 2024, whereas 24 is highlighted, you can change it to 23, 22, or another year, saying 2017, and then you will get that prior year's Form 8843. So now when coming to saying filing U.S. income tax return, of course, for a resident alien, one has to fill out the intake form, usually called 13614C, and file a 1040 form. And the filing status could be single, head of household or HOH, married filing separately, MFS, married filing jointly, MFJ, or qualifying surviving spouse, QSS. But for a non-resident alien, it's different. The non-resident alien has to fill out the 13614 NR and Form 8843. And of course, afterward, depending on whether the person has U.S. source income, you either only file the Form 8843 or you have to file the 1040 NR, aka full U.S. income tax return, along with the Form 8843. So for the filing statuses on the 1040 NR, they're generally only one of the two: single, if you're a single non-resident alien, or if you're a married non-resident alien, married filing separately. There is no HOH or MFJ. Very limited and very rare. A few of them may be able to do qualifying surviving spouse, but the qualifying surviving spouse requires a dependent, and it's not any non-resident alien can do it. Only those from Canada, Mexico, South Korea, and India, they may be able to do it. So just bear this in mind. If you're not one of those 4 countries, don't claim any dependents. Don't argue with me and saying, why couldn't I claim dependents? You're not born in these 4 countries, period. And of course, everybody has to, if they have to file a 1040 NR, everybody has to file a federal return. But some people ask, do they need to file state return? Well, that depends. If the state has a state income tax, of course they have to file. And non-resident aliens can only file non-resident state returns because they are not a resident. And for the state tax purposes. But for those who are resident aliens, they may file full year resident return, part year resident return, or non-resident return. And of course, claim any applicable state tax credit. So let's say if you live in New York State and all of a sudden you become a resident alien for U.S. tax purposes and you were still an undergrad, then all of a sudden not only you can claim very likely the education credit on the federal return, and it's better to get AOTC, American Opportunity Tax Credit, but of course you can also claim the New York tuition credit under the full year New York return. Look, this is related to the state tax law because the New York tuition credit, in order to claim that, the very first requirement is that one must be a full year New York resident, cannot be a per year, cannot be a non-resident, period. And of course, these states in the United States, they don't have any state income tax. Alaska, Florida, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Washington, Wyoming. So in those 9 states, the non-resident aliens or resident aliens alike, they don't need to file. And now here's this $5 question. Can we file the federal and state at the same time? Well, generally for the most recent 3 tax years, like right now it's 2022, 23, and 24, we not only we can e-file, but a lot of those states they allow state-only e-filing. Though the problem is that only 3 states they do not allow state-only e-filing: Arkansas, Mississippi, and Oklahoma. So in that situation, only after the federal is accepted, then the state can be processed. Otherwise, the taxpayer has to literally mail the state return to that state tax agency. And of course, usually for tax return can be e-filed, the person could be on resident aliens 1040 forms or single non-resident aliens 1040 NRs along with the 8843. But what about you can't e-file federal and state at the same time? Then if the tax returns are simply too old, say right now 2020, 21, and 2019, or any married non-resident aliens 1040 NRs, or any married filing separate 1040 returns as without any spouses as SSN or ITINs, then you have to paper file. The federal has to be mailed to IRS according to the federal return type and whether it has balance due. So if the federal return shows the person doesn't owe or gets a refund, then perhaps it can be mailed to Austin, Texas as a 1040 NR or Kansas City, Missouri as 1040. But if the person owes, that means the person has a balance due. Then the person has to mail to Charlotte, North Carolina if 1040 NR, or maybe Louisville, Kentucky, if you live in New York or New Jersey, or Cincinnati, Ohio, if you live in Pennsylvania, or depending on which state you live, then you mail it to the correct IRS address, which you can actually go onto the irs.gov website and under the file, choose where to file and then paper returns. So then you will see as an international taxpayer or you're just a resident alien for US tax purposes, where to correctly mail that US tax return. And of course, for the state return, you mail to that state tax agency designated address. A lot of those agencies, they have different addresses, saying one for the balance due, another one for refund, and then maybe another one, no refund, no payment. You just have to be careful. Don't mail it to the incorrect address, and then you complain about saying, why didn't I receive anything back? Because of your mistake. Okay, so for the 1040 NR or a few of those 1040 forms, do you want to claim tax treaty benefits? Actually, some of the countries they have tax treaties with the United States, so you may be able to actually claim the tax treaty benefits and exclude some or all of those wages, scholarship, fellowship, literally from the 1040 NR. So if for a student, sometimes that could be reducing that adjusted gross income to zero and literally get back all the federal withholding if possible. And then for a researcher or a scholar, the result of excluding all the wages from their tax return can also result in zero AGI and get back the federal withholding. But be careful, some of the tax treaties, they have provisions. They can retroactively eliminate the benefits if the allowable stay in the U.S. or the income amount exceeds what's defined in tax treaties. So a case and example is the U.S. India tax treaty for a J1 visa holder. As long as the visa holder didn't stay in U.S. for more than 2 years, then they can enjoy that tax treaty benefit. But if they overstay it, then they have to retroactively eliminate the benefits and they have to amend the previous year's tax return, and then they lose the benefits. Okay, and then so here's this very interesting question. Unfortunately, not everybody files a correct U.S. income tax return, and eventually some people they have to amend. So the most common reasons here, as I listed, if a resident alien, sometimes they file 1040 NR, instead of 1040 because they didn't know their situation. They think, okay, I'm an F1 or J1 visa holder, and yeah, I'm a foreigner. I'm not a U.S. citizen, not a green card holder. Then I can only file 1040 NR, simply not 1040, or just simply the wrong filing status, saying you could have filed head of household and simply claim dependents, but you filed single with dependents, or you want to change it from married filing separately to married filing jointly, or vice versa. And of course, some people they didn't know they can claim dependents as resident aliens just because they think, oh, we're a foreigner and we're not going to claim anybody. Or the resident alien didn't claim any tax credits at all, despite eligible under federal and or state returns. So a case example is saying a foreign undergraduate, once the person becomes a resident alien for U.S. tax purposes, didn't know even without any income, the person can still file U.S. income tax return and may be able to get education credit, or didn't report all income for the tax year, or didn't claim any applicable deductions, or just simply didn't claim certain tax treaty provisions like the F1 Chinese student didn't claim U.S.-China tax treaty Article 20C despite being tax resident beyond 5 years. And for the non-resident aliens, the number one mistake is file 1040 instead of 1040 NR, because they erroneously assume, I stay in the U.S. For more than 183 days, and this is my first year in U.S. as an F1 visa holder. Well, unless you give me the proof whether you came to U.S. before under another visa, say F1, F2, or even J1, J2, well, you gotta file 1040 NR instead. And of course, some of the taxpayers they filed 1040 NR but didn't submit the 8843, or didn't claim the tax treaty benefits. Now, this scenario could be rare, but it doesn't mean it will not happen. Saying an Indian student didn't know he or she can claim standard deduction per the U.S.-India Tax Treaty Article 22, but just simply saying, you know what, I just simply claim itemized deduction, or didn't report all the income, including those listed on the 1042S. So that 1042S is a very unique form. It is only available on or after March 15th, after that tax year. So say you wanted to get a 1042S for tax year 2024, you have to wait until March 15, 2025 to get the form. You can't file too early and then not waiting for the 1042S, because we don't know what kind of income is reported on it. It could be wages, it could be scholarship, it could be literally interest, dividends, or even capital gains. You just never know. Or just like previously I mentioned, that the J1 visa holder from India overstay the time period and literally retroactively losing the benefits. So the person has to literally amend prior year tax returns. Okay, so regarding whether to e-file amended return or not, well, that depends. If the original return was already paper filed, say as instructed by Spring Tax, or because previously IRS doesn't allow to e-file it, then the amended return has to be paper filed as well. And all of 1040X now goes to Austin, Texas, whereas the amended state return, if any, will has to mail to that state tax agency designated address. But if the original return was e-filed, say a single non-resident alien 1040 NR, then the 1040X can also be e-filed, whereas the amended state return generally can be e-filed as well, except be careful about Arkansas, Mississippi, and Oklahoma, because we want to make sure the 1040X is accepted so that the state amended return can be also processed. So now another topic just outside of those 1040 and 1040 NR, which sometimes bother the individual taxpayers, is that Social Security and Medicare taxes, collectively FICA taxes. So if you have a W-2, you can literally see it and see whether there are any data in box 3 to 6, and in particular the box 4 is the Social Security taxes, whereas box 6 is the Medicare taxes. So on the FICA taxes, the summary rule is if the person is a U.S. citizen or resident alien, then generally is not exempt from FICA taxes, except if you have a work-study program at a college or university, then the college and university, they are not required to withhold FICA taxes. Other than that, if an F1 or J1 visa holder, they're generally exempt from FICA taxes during their time period as exempt individuals. So say if F1 visa holder in the 5-year period as a non-resident alien, they should not see their Social Security and Medicare taxes withheld. Likewise, a J1 visa holder in the first 2 years cannot withhold any FICA taxes. But here is this: the J2 visa holders, they are not exempt from FICA taxes despite their dependence of J1 visa holders, because they don't have the same purpose as J1 visa holders. But J2 visa holders, they are allowed to work in US. F2 visa holders, they are not allowed to work in US. And usually H4 visa holders, which are dependents of H1B holders, they are not allowed, except if somehow the H4 visa holder secure an employment authorization document or EAD, then they may be allowed. And of course, if anybody sees a FICA tax refund request, now I share with you a very good instruction compiled by the Emory University, and it's better to read it from A to Z. You'll figure out how to actually do it. But of course, you must first try to ask that employer to issue the FICA tax refund. And of course, it's better if they can grant your request, but we know not all employers, they're the same. Some of them, they just simply refuse to do it. In that situation, you better secure any written statement, including those listing the reason why they decline to grant your refund request. And then after that, then you turn to the IRS for help. When turning to the IRS for help, you can consult with the Emory University instructions on FICA tax refund. Follow the Form 843, follow the Form 8316, and gather all the documents, including the W-2 listing the FICA tax withholding, a copy of your visa, I-20, I-94, employment authorization document, and any supporting statement regarding efforts in vain to secure FICA tax refund requests, and this and that. And of course, you have to mail them in a separate envelope to this address: Department of Treasury, Internal Revenue Service Center, Ogden, Utah, 84201-0038. But IRS will take 6 months or more to just process and issue the refund request. So of course, it is the longest route, but it's still worth it. And then of course, any other questions? If you still have any questions, just feel free to write to me at bfu@cwfphilly.org, or just simply visit Campaign for Working Families headquarters if possible at 935 North 29th Street, Philadelphia, PA 19130. That is at near 29th and Girard. And if you board public transportation, you can board 15G1 bus or trolley or 74849. So thanks for listening to my webinar. See you next time.